This is the Soul-Filled Sisterhood podcast, and I'm your host, Nicole Burgess, licensed marriage and family therapist and an empowerment mentor for women. The information shared in this podcast is not a substitute, nor is it to convey professional, psychological, financial, or medical advice. If you could use such services, please seek them out from someone you trust. Now here is today's episode. Episode 92. Before we dive into today's episode, if you are liking what you're hearing on the Soul-Filled Sisterhood podcast, I encourage you to go out to iTunes and leave me either a star rating and/or go in there and put in an actual review itself. It helps with the algorithms, which then helps promote the podcast for other women to find it when they're searching in iTunes. Thank you again for your support. Now here is today's episode. Well, welcome, sisters. I am truly excited about this upcoming conversation with a friend and colleague of mine because the topic we're going to address today is really impacting everybody worldwide with this pandemic. So today, my guest is Diane Diaz, and she goes by Dee Dee. Dee Dee is a registered mental health counselor intern in the state of Florida with a passion for grief education, grief care, grief advocacy, but she's really a grief agent. Born into a world of healing grief, she has experienced so many losses by the age of 18 that she believes she knew everything there was to know about the grieving process. Her exposure to homicide, suicide, natural deaths, chronic illness, sudden deaths, and traumatic deaths made her truly believe that. What else could there be, she thought? That belief was her truth until her only son, Sergio, died. Through the tender moments and years that followed her greatest loss, she encountered many professionals who, through no fault of their own, invalidated, minimized, and avoided her grief. This was mainly due to their personal grief illiteracy. Becoming an expert in her own grief, she turned her years of volunteering in the field into a new career. Determined to help educate others in society where loss, death, dying, and bereavement are still challenged with honest, compassionate, and understanding conversations. Her drive was propelled by her lifelong love of helping people and the sheer determination that every professional and person has the capacity to compassionately connect with grievers with the time, gifts, and talents they already possess. So, Dee Dee, I just want to say thank you so much for coming on today and being willing to talk more about grief, bereavement. And we know that it's not only about actual people dying, it's that and so much more. So thank you so much for being on today.
Thank you for that warm welcome, Nicole. It's truly an honor and a pleasure for me to be able just to talk about all things that we all experience on a day-to-day basis, loss and grief, even if we don't recognize that that's exactly what we're being exposed to. So thank you.
Yeah. And so based on your introduction that you gave me and that I just read, what has really helped you kind of navigate this whole calling that has really come forward for you? What has helped you kind of navigate to get to where you are today? What has helped you?
So I think my upbringing was probably one of the first things that has helped me because being exposed to so much loss and all different kinds of loss from early on has always left me in a state of contemplating that inner intuition of knowing that there's just more to life than just sitting in the suffering.
Yeah.
And yet really being able to lean into that, to just kind of put some weight into those things that kind of make us uncomfortable. Because the tendency, right, is to just run. The tendency is to avoid it. The tendency is to not feel uncomfortable, to feel more safe and secure. And in that, sometimes we just lose the lesson that life has for us.
Well, we minimize how we feel doing that
Mhm.
too, right? When we shove it down, when we dismiss it, when we turn away, we're
Mhm.
not doing a service to us where we can heal and move on. We're making things, I want to say, worse
Mhm.
versus better.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the biggest myths that is in um, that we've learned throughout our years
Mhm.
about loss and grief is that if we compartmentalize it, if we stuff it,
Mhm.
if we avoid it, if we pretend that it's not there or deny it, that somehow or another it's going to feel better. And the truth is that grief is just like laughter. I use the analogy all the time with the people that I'm supporting, the individuals who I'm supporting, because if we find something that's funny, we tend to giggle, we tend to
Mhm.
laugh, we tend to sometimes do that ugly laugh, right, and cry and
Yep.
snort,
Mhm.
and just kind of lose ourselves in that. And maybe there are times that laughing out loud isn't appropriate. And so we stifle it.
Mhm.
And when we stifle it, um, it, it tries to come back out and sometimes with a vengeance, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And if we're able to hold it back and we're able to compose ourselves and the moment passes, there's going to be a time where that thought is going to come back. There's going to be a time where something is going to remind us of that moment and we're going to start laughing,
Mhm.
right? And then we allow it to happen. We don't control it. Well, grief is just like that. It's on the other side of the spectrum.
Right.
It's the complete total swing of the pendulum into, into us trying to avoid it and stuff it down. It's going to come out.
Mhm.
And sometimes it's going to come out in the most inopportune moments or with the most unexpected trigger.
Yeah. Yeah. I wanted us to back up just a moment because I know
Mhm.
when I read your bio, we talked more about the physical loss, the death of a person, persons, those in your life. Would you mind sharing some other things that people can lose that can change, which is equivalent to death? That sometimes people just don't recognize it. And I know just because from what I've seen in social media posts recently and people I'm hearing talking, they're like, I'm more irritable and I don't understand why. Or I'm just like
Mhm.
crying at the drop of a hat and I don't get it. So, would
Mhm.
you mind sharing some other things that can shift in a person's life that actually is grief related?
Absolutely. So, even in that, I've been doing a lot of just kind of reflecting
Mhm.
because I recognize that my bio is really geared towards the death, dying, and bereavement piece. And while it talks about loss, the conversation of grief related to loss is not something that I've put on the forefront. And it's something that I'm feeling really called to adjust, to do a
Mhm.
pivot on. Um, in those years that I talk about my lifelong experience with loss and grief, um, I've also experienced a loss of identity,
Mhm.
the loss of the assumption of life, right?
Yes. Yes.
Um, moving,
Yep.
just and using myself as an example. And I like to use myself as an example, not to kind of toot my own horn, but because I never want to be able to accidentally share any client or privileged information.
Mhm.
And so I know that in sharing my story has resonated with many of those who I have supported. And
Mhm.
so it just makes it easier, right?
Mhm.
To
Mhm.
just talk about me. And so early on, like right now, I'm feeling for all these seniors,
Yeah.
all these high school seniors who have been conditioned, have been taught, have had a lifelong goal of going to school, graduating from kindergarten, graduating from fifth grade, moving into middle school into high school, and all so that we can have this rite of passage, right?
Yep.
At high school, so we can walk the stage and grab our diploma and
Mhm.
just move into college, right? If college
Yeah.
is part of what we're thinking.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so I was like that. I was definitely like that. In my freshman to sophomore year, I had to move from one city to another. And that was tough because I was moving from a place where I grew up with all my friends
Mhm.
and people my same age into a high school where I knew no one.
Yep.
So that was a grieving period for me. There's that uncertainty of, am I going to fit in? Am I not going to fit in? Am I going to make friends?
Yep.
So there's fear in that. There's that denial. I can't believe my parents are moving me.
Yep.
Don't they know they're ruining my life?
Yes. Uh-huh.
So there's a lot of teens right now who are angry.
Yeah.
And they're irritable and they're lashing out at their parents, and their parents are seeing it as them being defiant, as them being, kids having the case of the butts,
Yeah.
really,
Yeah.
if we want to poke fun at it. And so my compassionate lens shifts that into recognizing that that is grief for that child. But kids don't know, especially teens, they don't know how to process grief in that capacity.
Right.
So when it comes to death, dying, and bereavement, they process it similarly to an adult. But when it comes to grief as in loss, everyday loss, the question then really focuses on the what for. What was this all for? Or, why is this happening? And in that creates some tension. They don't know how to verbalize that.
Yeah.
And parents don't recognize it, so they don't know how to support it.
Well, I mean, even like the adults, for me, I can go back with, I love being at home. I'm an introvert. I just do. I like my house. I like being home, all that good stuff. But I started to finally get last week, I was just like, oh, wait, what I also like is having the choice to go where I wanted to, when I wanted to, and I don't have that choice anymore. And I've heard that from other adults as well. Just like, I am so irritable because I just can't go. And that's also what you're talking about, to go back to the teens. It's the loss of that in-person stuff with their friends, like being able to see them at school and hang out afterwards, go to the coffee shop. It's like, yeah, that's gone.
And that's really important, because I think that part of what we're all experiencing collaboratively right now is that anticipatory grief. Yes. What happens? What's coming? That impending doom. We don't feel safe, right? And it's complicated. Why? It's complicated because there's so many domains of our functioning, socially, spiritually, physically, just even our mind. Our cognitively, how we can't understand it. We are not able to wrap our brains or our minds around it. So that complicates it. It's disenfranchised because socially we're not recognizing, we're starting to awaken to the fact that we can call it grief. Yeah. Right? But before, it wasn't recognized as grief. And because we are grief illiterate, we don't understand the difference between grief and loss and that whole process. So if you don't mind it, and you would indulge me, and I can just take a step back and kind of really define that.
Yes.
Yeah. So, when we're talking about loss, we're talking about something that's related to something we no longer have, right? So it could be something as in a person, place, or a thing, right? And then the grief work that we're experiencing is the psychological process of coping with that significant loss.
Yeah.
And I'll say that again, it's the psychological process of coping with that significant loss. And in how we are trying to understand it logically, when we talk about neuroscience and we recognize the different parts of the brain, the prefrontal cortex is not making that connection for the with the amygdala, right? The little that little almond-shaped piece of the brain that really just tells us that we're not safe, that there's danger, that things are, that we either are going to freeze, get stuck in what we're thinking and doing. We're either going to roll over because we believe we're going to die from this, and it's just, or we're going to run away, right? Because that's how we can control it,
Yes.
if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so just really knowing that the mourning is that outward expression of that deep sorrow that we're feeling. So that outward expression can be, culturally speaking, if it's death, dying, and bereavement, it's how we would dress, right? It's what we would show out to the world. But mourning in this context of grief is being shown through our behavior, through our reactions. And so the grief piece is that deep sorrow. It's the inward expression of that significant loss. It's how we react to the bereavement, to the universal response of any loss. And so we're kind of coming together compassionately, understanding that, hey, we're grieving that we no longer have a routine.
Yeah.
Right? We don't have that social distancing as much as we hated going to work and getting up early every morning.
Yep.
There was a sense of comfort in that. There was a sense of safety in that. There was a sense of control, because control is an illusion.
Correct.
Right?
Yes, very much so.
So here's one thing that most people don't think. Okay, so we're essentially detoxing. Okay. And yet when you moved into having a job and starting a new routine and getting into a new environment with new people, it's the same type of grief. It's just that we don't see it that way.
Yes.
We still feel uncomfortable. We still don't feel safe. However, we've shifted at one point or another, we shifted into that reality and kind of absorbed that vibration, kind of accepted that was part of our new normal. And I use that term very, very loosely.
Yeah.
And so what we're experiencing is that in reverse.
Yeah.
So there's an assumption of life that we are grieving. We thought that we would be working right now. We thought that Corona wasn't going to be a thing.
Yep.
We thought, that it was going to get contained, that it couldn't happen to us. Oh my gosh.
Yes.
How many people have I heard that from? I didn't think that this could happen to me. And it's not tangible when it's happening to other people. Yeah, we're aware of it, right? But when it doesn't hit home, it's a little bit easier to disconnect.
Yeah, I think Brene Brown talks about that quite a bit. And I can't remember which one of her books. I don't know if it was the Be the Leader or what. But, when we do the us versus them kind of mentality, it's like it's happening over there, not over here, right? Anytime we've got the either or things going on in our thinking, there becomes that disconnect. And you've just named it, that it's like, well, it can't happen to me. It only happens to older people. It doesn't happen to the younger people. It's like, nope, this virus isn't discriminating. It doesn't matter the gender, doesn't matter the race, doesn't matter your age. It's hitting anybody and everybody it possibly can.
And so I think what's happening now that we're like 3-4 weeks going into this, where the initial shock is kind of lifting. Now the denial piece is kind of is kind of getting broken down as well.
Yes.
Right. And so those who have inhibited their grief, right? Those people who have been unwilling to express their grief outwardly, say it out loud, or by, maybe they were disconnecting, or maybe they were shutting down their emotions. Now it's kind of shifted into a place of where inhibiting their grief isn't really serving them.
Yeah.
Delaying the grief, being purposeful and sometimes even unintentional to inhibit that grief is really starting to show up. It's starting to manifest. And so delaying it or extending that period of time post loss is no longer serving many people.
Right.
And so in that, there's a cumulative agent that's happening, right? There's multiple things that we're grieving all at one time. And it kind of compounds itself during this period period of grieving. Um, and so, yeah, what we're really seeing is ambiguous loss, right?
Yes.
Where there's a physical absence of something
Yeah.
or someone, and there's a psychological presence. We are fully aware that that is missing, and we're not able to grasp it. We're not able to bring it back. In the death, dying, and bereavement world, that would look like a missing person, right? But in the loss and grief world right now, as we know it, that looks like not being able to go to the stores, not being able to divert our attention with shop therapy.
Yep.
Right. Even though we've got Amazon.
Right.
But even Amazon is limiting a lot of the things that they deliver, you know, or prioritizing some of the orders that they fill. So even in that, there's loss.
Yeah.
You know, and we don't recognize it at that. So our primary loss was, I would have to say, the choice.
Yeah.
Right. The choice of staying home, of being quarantined, of ignoring the grief. But then all the secondary losses is everything that's interconnected with that. So if you're looking at a web, like a spider web,
Good
you know,
image.
the primary loss is in the middle, but then you have all these little offshoots, right?
Yeah.
That kind of holds that center together. And then you have all these other little strings that kind of tie each offshoot to and in itself. So it's a bridge. It's a bridge that we don't even recognize.
Well, all right, Dee Dee. So we've given some of my listeners like an education, like here's, you know, really normalizing what their experience is like. Hey, whatever you're feeling, whatever you're experiencing, it's really truly a collective and it's normal. You're going through this, so are we. What are some things that they can do, whether they have their teens at home or even younger ones at home, or their own process for themselves? What are some tips or strategies to help them not get necessarily stuck in that? Because again, you know, I've talked in previous episodes here regarding the pandemic about when fear takes a hold, it really does a very narrow thinking and gets us very much stuck in scarcity and there's no way out of this. And we know this is a temporary thing, just as all things in the past have been temporary, as all of our emotions are temporary. It's like, so is this. We will come through to the other side. We just don't know the exact timing of that. Again, that whole wanting to control the exact time is an illusion.
Right.
What are some things people can do, though, to help them continue to move through the loss and the grief versus getting stuck in it?
I think that's such a beautiful question because I think that's something that we all struggle with and that looks different for every person. I tend to tell people to get curious with their everyday life, right? We have the answers. We just don't believe that we have the answers. And when we're in a crisis, we forget that we have the answers. Right. So just kind of leaning into what your everyday life looks like. And I think that starts, I believe that starts with awareness, right? The awareness is a focus on a certain point. It's concentrating loosely on an area of your life.
Well, it's also coming back to the here and now. Like we talked before we hit the record button. It's consistently, and that's what I say on a lot of the podcast episodes too. It's you only have now.
Right.
So yeah, you're saying getting curious with where you are right now in your life. Observe it, explore it.
Yeah. And you know, and you just reminded me of an important piece is that new grief will bring up old grief.
Yes.
So new grief will bring up unresolved grief. And even if you have worked through grief before, through a loss before, if you haven't shifted into incorporating that loss into your life fully without any conditions, without any judgment, that will show back up.
Yeah.
You know,
it's a great reminder. Yeah.
So I would say after awareness is just kind of really leaning into it, shift into staying in the moment, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because fear innately makes us want to run away from it.
Mm-hmm.
And um, and even in that, like I know a lot of people have a lot of judgment around compartmentalizing their grief.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to encourage people, we do that every day.
Yeah.
So if we label it bad or good, we miss the moment.
Yeah.
We miss the gift of being able to do that. And then going with it,
Mm-hmm.
follow that trail, stay with that thought, explore what it is that's in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Because in doing that, that's where you're going to find your meaning. That's where you're going to find the purpose. That's where you're going to find the answers. That's where you're going to find the hope.
Mm-hmm.
And we do that every day. People are like, well, what's this deal with meaning and purpose? Hello. If you ever have a question and you ask somebody a question about what it is that they're saying, you are engaging in meaning making.
Yep.
And you are searching for answers, right?
Yeah.
And in that, you're searching for purpose.
Beautifully said.
Yeah.
Well, and I think you also just named it too. It's when you give yourself permission to go deeper into that thought. And I know I tell people, it's like, just because you have a thought doesn't mean it's true. And so it's not necessarily like just kind of staying, if you're feeling like, oh my gosh, this is really hard, then I'll say, drop out of your head and drop into your body. Where do you feel that right now in your body? What is it trying to tell you? And so for me, I would say I would then drop into whatever that thought was. If there was a tightness or a pit that I feel in my stomach, I would allow myself to go into my stomach. I'd allow myself to breathe. Is there a color that comes up? Is there a word that comes up? Is there a memory that comes up? Is there a song that comes up? Just allow it to be whatever it's going to be.
I so love that. I really do believe that our soul is a bridge to our heart, to our mind, and to our body. And it connects us to our spirit.
Yeah.
And when you recognize that all four things are interconnected, it allows you to be able to do exactly what you were saying. Give it a picture, give it a feeling, recognize where it's manifesting in your body. How are you discharging that?
Yeah.
How are you releasing it? How are you allowing that to flow through you and not stay in you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I would also imagine too, for families, for ladies who are listening, who have families at home, it's setting aside some time for your family members where everybody gets to talk about like, hey, what's coming up for you today? How you doing? Letting there be truly a safe space to talk about your emotions, the irritations, the frustrations, the sadness, the whatever it may be. Because this is what you and I are talking about. It's being able to articulate it to the best of your ability. Again, sometimes it's like you don't even know the words. You're just like, I'm just grr today. And I don't understand why, but I'm all grrry. And it's like, okay, so you're feeling some irritation. Where do you feel that in your body? What do you want to say? Is there anything else that you want to say about it? And just allow the person to be able to process to what is going on for them in that moment. So that, like we're saying at the beginning, it's not getting stuffed down. It's not getting dismissed. It's not getting denied.
Yeah.
It's getting talked about.
Yeah. And I think our mindset really has a lot to do with it, right?
Yeah.
Because if we believe and our values are centered on judgment and we believe that we are being controlled, that we don't have we have no say in the choice of going out, that somebody is demanding that we stay in. If we focus on that, then we miss the opportunity to recognize that we have a choice. It might not be the best choice. It might really suck to have to lean into that choice, right?
Right.
Because we can choose to go with that or we can choose to go against it. And then the in between of that is the surrendering, right? I'm going to surrender. I don't like it. I'm going to complain. I'm going to kick and scream and throw a temper tantrum because I really don't like it. And everybody's going to hear it. That again comes back to metabolizing your grief.
Yep.
You're really expressing it in a particular way. So I love that that coming to the table image that you painted for me, that family meeting, that creating space to be able to share what's vulnerable and intimate in these moments that just don't have words, and be able to just give it some palpable, some kind of tangible way of it being expressed. And, sometimes it is being creative. It could be that. It could be in the withdrawal as well. I think one piece that we really forget. So for me, I'm an introverted, extroverted person, right? I could be an extrovert when I'm feeling comfortable in my environment, or when I am feeling connected with those who are around me. But I tend to just be an introvert, and I really fuel on some alone time, on things that really feed me spiritually, that feed me just, I don't know, it's just me. It's my thriving, right? Connecting and grounding myself in nature. Those are the things that I love to do. That's what feels good for me. And then this morning, as I sat in devotional and in meditation and in prayer, I had laid on my heart the term Sabbath, right? And so Sabbath really talks about resting. In the Christian world, we hear in Exodus, in the Bible, it tells us that on the seventh day, we are supposed to rest. And so sometimes we take that really literally, but we can engage in a Sabbath, and it doesn't have to be a full day of rest. It could be moment to moment. It could be the waking up before the rest of the family wakes up, before the rest of the world wakes up.
Yeah.
It could be at the end of the day when you're winding everything down and just being reflective on what's happened during the day, leaning into the takeaways, and just being grateful or reflecting on the abundance of the day, the things that have gone really, really well.
Beautiful.
And we need rest. We are designed to rest, right?
Yes, we are.
We have to sleep. What happens if we don't sleep? We become cranky, right?
Yeah.
However, I think that we kind of get focused on sleeping is the only time to really rest.
Yeah.
And so even in this uncomfortableness of staying home, whether we're introverted or extroverted, the shift of resting really is posing a challenge, because we've been conditioned to multitask. We've been conditioned to, to batch out the things that that we can delegate out to other people, or, focus on in a moment and then move in from one thing to another consistently. So resting really feels uncomfortable.
Yeah.
There's an anxious vibration to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So grateful that you named that, because it is making me think of some of the conversations I've had with people over these last few weeks. It's just like, I don't know what to do if I'm not hurrying along and doing 5,000 things. It's like, but isn't that a beautiful gift? It may feel disorienting for the moment. And at the same time, I'm really encouraging people to explore like what was working and what is now working, what may need to be let go. And like you said earlier, it's really surrendering into these moments of just getting curious about what is going on. And going forward, I may keep this, and no, I don't need to. I can do it differently.
Yeah. And I think that that's one of the things you said, the word gift. I do find that is a big challenge right now with the conversations that I've been having with individuals who are needing support,
Right.
because they don't see it as a gift.
Right.
Like, what do you get? Can I return this to sender? Can I regift this to someone else?
No regifting.
Right? And what's the gift in this? And so it even in that, right? People are like, "Oh, that just doesn't make any sense, Dee Dee. What the hell are you talking about? What kind of
Right.
gift are you talking about?" And I think that even in that definition of a gift, the pushback is that we've learned that resting and taking time for ourselves is not acceptable. That
Yeah.
somehow we're lazy, somehow
Right.
we're being unproductive,
Right.
somehow we're bad, we're defective,
Yes.
and again, there's so much judgment, and I use the word, but, um, bold, exclamation point,
Mm-hmm.
underline, italicize, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you heal your mind and your body and your heart and your soul and your spirit if you don't take the time to rest?
Yeah.
How can you?
Right. There's no space for it.
Your soul is the being of our existence,
Mm-hmm.
and our spirit is the essence that holds that being.
Yeah.
So how do we create that space if we're not willing to see it in another light? If we're not
Right.
willing to even just be open to the possibility that it could be a gift.
Right. And I want to go back to what you were saying earlier, too, like as the introvert, extrovert, of the sense of needing that quiet time for yourself to get curious. And so anyone who's listening, whether you've got a family or you don't within your household right now, journal, get out your
Mhm.
art supplies, get
Mhm.
out your pens to create poems, to write stories, whatever you need to do to really process that. Again, when you go within, allow
Mhm.
whatever's coming up to be put out on paper on something, so
Mhm.
that you can also see it. It's not just held in your mind. It's very powerful that way to be able to see it come out. And again, some people think it's only writing. It's like, no, there's so many ways for you
Mhm.
to allow it to come out.
Mhm.
And then I would encourage you to connect with trusted friends, trusted family members, those who can hold this space for you as you may want to share what is going on with you and they with you, creating that trusted space. So you, again, know that you're not alone in this because you're truly not.
Right. Right. And I would say, and that's one of the things. So a lot of times people are like, people as in professionals in the field, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Because we have this need of saying, what kind of interventions do you use with your
Right.
clinical clients? And, and I'm like, I'm really eclectic. And they're like, well, what
Yes.
does that mean?
It's like whatever works for the person.
Exactly. I meet them where they're at. I
Yes.
truly meet them where they're at. And I'll tell you that when Sergio died, one of the things that was very difficult for me was spiritually was being able to go back to stepping and leaning into my faith
Yeah.
and even just holding on to hope,
Hmm.
right? Um, and my words failed me.
Yep.
I had no words. So there was journaling was it just it
Wasn't
felt
there.
yeah, it felt foreign.
Yeah.
I've always been an artist. I can't tell you, I just celebrated Sergio's 18-year angelversary on
Hmm.
Saturday. And for the longest time, I'm going to say 16 years of that, I didn't tap into drawing or
Hmm.
painting or any of that. Now, I've gone back to writing,
Hmm.
but during that time when my words failed me, music, the
Mm.
lyrics to songs
Yes.
gave me those words.
Yes.
And that's what started melting that numbness away. That's what started bringing me back into the world because I didn't go through that period of denial or anger, because we have this misconception again of the 5 stages, the 7 stages, the phases of grief and all this other stuff. I didn't go through those things, but I did recognize that there was a shutdown.
Hmm.
There was, and I knew in the pit of my stomach, not just from experience, but intuitively that there was something more. And so, yeah, really encouraging people to use what has worked for you, but not be scared of trying new things.
Yes.
And if it doesn't work the first time when you try something new, don't give up on it.
Yeah.
Go back a couple of times, you know, 3, 4, 5 more times. You don't have to do it persistently to feed the reality or look for the evidence that it doesn't work, but space it out as you're getting curious, with trying out new things.
I love it. Love it, love it, love it. Well, Dee Dee, I'm curious before I kind of share with the listeners all the ways they can find you, get a hold of you. Is there anything that I missed during our conversation that you wanted to touch upon for them?
I think right now we're being called to be compassionate.
Yeah.
And in order to be compassionate with one another, we have to be empathetic. And in order to understand what empathy is and really just get a grasp of what that means, it's just kind of putting ourselves in someone else's shoes, right? Without holding on to ourselves as we do it, right? So what does that look like? I'll use my daughter as an example. I use her a lot, my oldest. She's probably rolling her eyes and she doesn't even know it. Why? She's very, very extroverted, right? And so when all of this started and we had to self-quarantine and so she's a very A-type personality. She's an officer. And so a very powerful leading role of a woman, right? And having, not that she doesn't have her rest, not that she doesn't have time for quiet, but all of a sudden her world stopped and she didn't have a choice in it. It's different from when you go on vacation, right? You stop the world on purpose, but there's intentionality behind it. And so it was really, I had to kind of step back as an introvert and put myself in her shoes to experience what she was experiencing, what she was going through, so that I could understand it through her lens. And when I say remove myself from that, it wasn't how would I fix it if it was me, but, how can I observe what the gifts and the time and the talent that she already has so that she can implement it for herself.
And I think that's a key distinction, that whatever is going on for those that you love, care about, whatever you're experiencing, it's not about fixing anything for anybody.
Right.
It's allowing them to be where they are. If they're asking for suggestions, if they're asking for some advice, that'd be a time where maybe you can say, well, here's what I would do if I were, in your shoes, or what comes up for me. But it's allow each person to be where they are. Just hold them in that space.
It isn't going to be, obviously, we're not going to be able to dig into this one, but just for food for thought, that what we are feeling for someone else, that needing to fix, that needing to step in to give advice to make it better, that's our own grief.
Yes.
For the grief that they're feeling.
That is so well articulated. Because it is. Yeah. Well, Dee Dee, thank you so much for coming on today, for naming this for so many of my listeners. Because if they're like most of the things that I'm hearing and seeing on social media and with other people, that they're thinking, yes, there is truly death, in the sense like people are dying from this virus, and it's the death along with all the losses that we're talking about today too. So thank you for coming on and sharing your wisdom. And ladies, I will have Dee Dee's information on the show notes. Her website is livelifechanged.com. She also has an offering where you can get 10% off her services if you use the phrase Soul-Filled Sisterhood Podcast, all one word. And then she also has her Facebook group and some other social media, Instagram and everything that I'll have on the website. So thank you so much, Dee Dee. So appreciate what you do and how you support people in our world.
Thank you for the opportunity to have the conversation, Nicole. It was amazing and delicious and just soul-filling all around.
Thank you for listening. If you haven't already, I invite you to go out to iTunes and please leave an honest rating and review. In the podcast world, this really helps other women find the podcast and they can see if it resonates with others out there. So I really appreciate all your support and leaving me a rating.